Divas, welcome back to A Deeper Dive with me, Dara Cam. This week's special guest. Very excited to introduce you all to Jennifer Jenkins. Jennifer Jenkins, former Brevard County School Board member who is the founder and chair of Educated We Stand. You will want to hear her origin story and her thoughts about the education system in Florida. Please join us today for a deeper dive with Jennifer Jenkins.
I founded Educated We Stand to be able to support and elect and protect school board members, not only in the state of Florida, but in other battleground states that are seeing the effects of this right-wing extremism bleeding into their school systems. And it's only been just a short time. It's been about 6 months, but we have been incredibly successful, and the outpouring of support has been overwhelming and really, really positive.
You're listening to Deeper Dive with Dara Cam, a podcast by the News Service of Florida. Let's dive in.
Divas, oh my goody gosh. Welcome back to A Deeper Dive with me, Dara Cam. Today's special guest is Jennifer Jenkins. She is not, believe it or not, one of my OGs. So she is a newcomer to me and to the show. Welcome to A Deeper Dive, Jennifer.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here today.
And the reason that I should have included this in your intro, but I'll say it now, Jennifer Jenkins is a former Brevard County School Board member who launched the group Educated We Stand last year. Before we talk about your new organization, it's newish organization, it's not quite a year old yet, I'd like you to let our listeners know about your history with public education, and you will find that she has a very interesting origin story with the Brevard County School Board.
Yeah. Do you have some really sinister music to start the intro?
No, I have the... That's not it. And I have jazz. Oh, that's kind of a good intro, but it doesn't even give you a hint. But go ahead.
I am a licensed speech language pathologist. I began working with Brevard Public Schools immediately from graduating college. My husband is a history teacher now for the past 15 years. And at the time when I decided to run for office, my daughter was entering VPK. And so I decided to run for school board just as an educator from a family of educators who wanted to fight for fair pay for teachers. That really was my goal. I cared about fighting for my ESC students, but I found myself in a situation I could have never expected or predicted. We had COVID, and the focus of the campaign came on mitigation for our students and our staff. It became very political and very heated. And in Ruby Red, Brevard County, county where Donald Trump won by 17 points in 2020, I unseated the Republican incumbent by nearly 10 points. The crazy origin story from that story is that opponent didn't take her loss lightly. And her name is Tina Descovich, and she went on to be one of the main co-founders of Moms for Liberty.
Her defeat to you was part of the impetus for her starting Moms for Liberty.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's interesting. I thought she already was a Moms for Liberty person. So I always love when I learn something. I think I'm such a know-it-all, but I've already learned, and we're 10 seconds in and I've already learned something.
I know so much about the dynamics and the politics that play prior to that happening and their launch happening. I mean, the reality was those conversations were probably happening before the election. I think her goal was to be seated on the school board while also fulfilling that role. I think the fact that she had lost her office that she didn't expect to lose just sped up the process, quite frankly.
I see. So how did you manage to pull off a victory in Brevard County? I guess you said that it is deep red. Was it the vitriol in the campaign that helped boost you in 2020?
I think it's multi-layered. I get asked this question all the time. And, my first gut feeling, honestly, is just because I had integrity. And I know that sounds so pie in the sky, but I think it's true. because, when I first started, I had no idea what I was doing. I literally Googled how to become a school board member. I've never ran a campaign. I honestly didn't even know who my elected local officials were.
Oh, wow.
And so I was just knocking on doors. I didn't know who was a Democrat, Republican, Independent. I didn't really even understand the concept of nonpartisan races at the time. But I was just having conversations at the doors with people about their schools and what mattered most to them. And quite often I had conversations with very conservative Republicans. But it was easy to talk to them because I was just coming to them as a genuine human being, talking about my concerns and listening to theirs and learning from their perspective. At some point when COVID hit and kind of took over, I didn't stop. I continued to go to doors. I stepped away and wore a mask, but I continued to campaign and to keep it as a priority for me to run this race and to win this election. And the main conversation, of course, was mitigations for our students and our staff.
Mm-hmm.
And we forget about this because there's been so much of the opposite rhetoric since then. But we forget that, elected Republicans back then also were concerned about COVID, also believed in masking as a form of mitigation to this virus. And because Tina was so vocally staunchly against any mitigation in our schools, any at all, that's ultimately why she lost her election. There were elected Republicans in this county that some people would be very shocked to find out that they supported me and potentially voted for me in that election. Because again, we forget that that's where we all started on that issue.
Sure, that's what the experts were saying. I mean, it was a very frightening time. And even when the data came out that children weren't getting this as much as others, we find out they're carrying it, they're bringing it home. And people, I have 3 personal friends / acquaintances here in Tallahassee, and they weren't all old people like me who died from COVID. So, I mean, people are still dying from COVID, from complications from COVID. And I think people forget that.
Yeah. And, I think a important perspective of this conversation too, because sometimes people kind of fluff off Brevard County as a small county in Florida, but we're actually the 10th largest school district in Florida and in the top 50 of the United States of America.
Really?
So,
I didn't know that. See, I've learned 2 things already.
yeah, I mean, we have 9,000 employees, 75,000 students, over 80 schools in this district. And so it is a tremendous responsibility
Sure.
when there is a health crisis going on for the school district to be engaged and listening to the experts.
Mm-hmm. We have so much to cover, but before we move on, since we're talking about this topic, which really interests me and a lot of people, is there anything you would have done differently that you think that the school board should have done differently during COVID?
I don't know how to answer that question. I've never been asked that question before. I wouldn't have done anything differently. I'm very proud of how I responded in that moment. Quite frankly, when I started, I hated speaking to strangers. I did not like being the center of attention. I didn't even like talking into microphones. I got forced into a position of becoming a loud, proud advocate who dug her heels into the ground to fight for what she believed. I'm really comfortable with what I did. I made it a priority to listen to our staff, to listen to our community, to be really transparent about the numbers and what was going on within our schools. I'm okay with that. I'm very proud of our school district. We had district staff members whose jobs primarily were to run our HR department and our student services department, who were legitimately taking COVID contact tracing calls at 4:00 in the morning, 3:00 in the morning, doing way beyond what their job duties are to ensure that our students and staff were safe. So I don't have any regrets. I do wish that it didn't take as long for the majority of my fellow board members to come alongside me to enforce a mask mandate, even with the opt-out, because I think that only fueled the chaos and controversy that Moms for Liberty was hoping for. It was unnecessary. I believe that the majority who eventually went alongside me were just fearful of the retaliation. I don't think it was that they didn't believe it was the right thing to do. I think that they were fearful. So I guess that's probably the one thing that I really, really regret. And I'll never forget when I started fighting really, really hard to ensure that we had those masks in our schools. It was motivated by a teacher that we had lost in a middle school where my office had been when I had worked. And she was terrified of getting COVID, according to her fellow staff members. She lived alone with her mom. She was scared to bring it home to her mom. She worked with our ESE students in a small classroom. And she was our first teacher to enter ICU, and she was our first teacher to die
Wow.
from COVID. And her mother died the following day.
Oh, no.
And I made a vow when I visited that school the next couple of days and saw the fear and everyone in her wing, like they were like purple from being so tired and scared. There was other members in that school that were in ICU or in the hospital or had been hospitalized. I made it a vow that I would continue to fight for them.
Wow.
So I guess sort of regret not being really, really forceful when it came to those kinds of stories. But, that's just hindsight.
It seems like, like another lifetime ago. And yet it really was only 4 years ago, less than 4 years ago. In some instances, I refer to before COVID as the before times and the after times, because to me, it was as a type 1 diabetic who's an older person, it had a tremendous impact on how I lived my life and my isolation, and I live alone. So there was a lot of fear, a lot of trepidation, and it was so politically charged too. I found it baffling at times that at that time in history, we became so tribal and that this health crisis became such a political wedge issue and still is really in many areas.
It felt very dehumanizing in the moment. It still does when I reflect on it. I wish that the stories of the people who were suffering and losing people in their lives were told more instead of this, this is a political fear that, the leftists are trying to take over your lives and tell you what to do with your bodies. I wish that those stories would have been told. I often reflect on too, this other story. It was a local elementary school of mine. A mom, she was pregnant. She had 3 kids. And she ended up passing away. And now the father was left with 4 kids to raise on his own. It's a tiny little community school. So the whole school was impacted. Our district didn't know how to handle that because there were peers of each grade level of the kids, of students that knew this mom, this was Mrs. So-and-so that they used to spend the weekends with. And so now we had to offer grievance services for, kids across grade levels for more than just, the children that were impacted in her family, for children outside of it too. So I just wish people would have understood the real human moment.
Yeah, I think that was lost. At times got drowned out by the political rhetoric surrounding, who's right and who's wrong. Thank you for that. Now, you launched, before we get to Educated We Stand, you tell me.
Hold on one second.
Sure.
I have to open the door for my husband.
Okay, let your husband in by all means. Yes. All right. Hang on.
So sorry.
Yeah, no worries. Are we set? Is he good to go?
Yes. Sorry.
Okay. No, that's fine. I was just waiting for you. You tell me if you want to jump to Educated We Stand, because I think these two issues are intertwined, because during the course, not only with the COVID issue and the masking, during the course of your time on the school board, a lot of these culture war issues became front and center in the political discourse because of measures that the legislature passed, the book restrictions. I'm not going to call them book bans, but people call them book bans, book removals, book restrictions, transgender issue, all of that bubbled up while you were on the school board, right? I saw a couple of stories I was researching before our chat. I think they called you like an outspoken critic of, there are different terms, but were you on your own there leading the charge against some of these ideological measures?
Outspoken critic is the nicest thing I was called.
Okay, now we can do.
What's funny is, no, I wasn't on my own fighting for those issues, but I was the only target of Moms for Liberty. Because the reality is an individual school board member has absolutely no power or control over a school district. They can't do anything by themselves. And so, the things that were supported or passed or protected, things that were put in place for our students and our staff was by a majority of the school board. But it was only me who was attacked. Before I get into Educated We Stand, I do think it is important to share my story a little bit deeper, because it gives a little bit more authenticity to my why and my perspective and why I think it's so important. But almost immediately when I got onto the board, I did become a target of Moms for Liberty, and the behaviors escalated very, very, very quickly. I was hit with a fire hose of accusations, harassment, intimidation, hate. And it started with masking. It was the anti-mask rhetoric for sure. But very, very quickly, I was seated in November of 2020. And I will never forget, it was February of 2021 when Ms. Descovich had posted a Facebook post about our LGBTQ guidance for administrators under the guise that this was a brand new document, that it was being done behind parents' backs, things of that nature, and really stoked this fire in our community against the LGBTQ community. And why that's important is because it was the very impetus of lies, misinformation, and disinformation from Moms for Liberty. That document exists, first of all, in many different forms, but across many, many school districts across the state of Florida. And it's a document that Tina actually saw herself when she was on the board. It just got delayed being published to administrators because of COVID. It's a document that had nothing unique on it. It literally stated the state and federal laws that supported LGBTQ students and staff, and gave examples of case laws that supported it. So that way, if administrators had questions about how to handle certain situations, or if they were challenged on how to handle a certain situation, that they would have a reference point. And quite frankly, it was ensuring that we had equity across the district so that we had administrators that weren't discriminating against certain staff members and students. It wasn't just students, it was also for our staff members. But from that just came chaos. Brevard County School Board meetings were what you see so often across the nation now, but it was happening months before anywhere else. Insane protests, bullhorns of people saying the most vicious and disgusting things about children, about myself, hateful, angry. We had to recess meetings constantly. We had to be filled to capacity multiple times. We had to close the doors because there was legitimately no more room for people to come into the meetings. Hours long of public comments accusing people of, again, just hateful and disgusting things. And that went on for a very, very long time. And it just escalated. And ultimately what it did, not only the damage morally for our community, and then eventually the state and the rest of the nation. But what it did was it stunted any positive action or progress for this community. Because I couldn't tell you one thing that our school board in that time for at least 2 years, 2.5 years in that like really raw, terrible moment, one thing we did collectively as a school board that was super positive and impactful for kids. Our staff members, our administrators, our district staff, absolutely doing amazing things for kids. I don't mean to take away from that.
Sure.
But collectively as the 5 members of a school board, no, there was no initiative that we came on together to push and to pass for our kids. And that's the dangerous part.
Let me stop you for a moment and ask you, all of this is going on. It's the focus of the community's attention. It's making national news in some instances. And if you're an LGBTQ child enrolled in a Brevard County school, or you're an LGBTQ instructor or school personnel, I'm sure you heard from those folks, or a parent. What are you hearing? What are they saying to you? What message are they, what are they saying? Are they saying like, we got to get out of here? And not everybody has the resources to up sticks, and not everybody wants to flee. I always hear people saying, oh, you need to leave Florida. I don't always hear people saying this, but in certain communities, you need to leave. It's not safe. But not everyone has those resources, and not everyone wants to leave their home.
It was heartbreaking for me. Honestly, that true, organic, natural liaison between the parents and the students and the staff members who either are LGBTQ themselves or have someone in their family that is what like propelled me to suddenly become this huge LGBTQ ally and advocate in the community. The heartbreaking stories, the fear, the harassment and bullying some of our students were having. There was one school that had repeated incidents where the Gay Straight Alliance Club was being specifically targeted. Those students were being sent death threats online. Their billboards were being destroyed. They spray painted "You're going to hell" in the hallway that they would meet. They would hide in their music teacher's room for days because they were scared to have transitions between class periods
Wow.
because they were being bullied. The administrator there, quite frankly, wasn't the most considerate person in the world. They stole a pride flag from a teacher's classroom and burned it and put it on social media of it burning. I had LGBTQ staff members who had reached out to me. They were being doxxed by Moms for Liberty members and Moms for America members. Their information being posted all over the internet. And I had personally 3 teachers that had been communicating with me for quite a while that eventually left the profession because they couldn't take it anymore.
Right.
There was a Moms for America member who would set up fake parent-teacher conferences to go into the classroom just to take pictures of their classroom to find something to claim that they were indoctrinating students with.
Wow.
And this teacher eventually ended up just leaving.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, these are people's lives. And I think what people forget, unfortunately, I've become very desensitized to the harassment and intimidation for what I've been through. But like these people don't know how to deal with that, and they shouldn't have to. You know, these are just regular people who wanted to become educators. And I just think people forget how human everyone is.
I don't know if you're comfortable doing this, but you talk about being harassed and intimidated. Do you want to give us any examples of what you were subjected to?
Yeah.
Other than, I mean, you mentioned the Facebook post.
You know, social media was nonstop and relentless for the attacks, but outside of that, it was nuts. It was every single day of my life, something was happening. I had 2 protests at my home. One of which, the biggest one, the most notable one, was the day that I was removed from Ron DeSantis' press conference at our Department of Health. That evening, about 25 protesters showed up in front of my tiny little beachside home. I had people following me all the time in cars. State Representative Randy Fine had 2.
Wait. I guess I should have interrupted earlier. The day you just glossed over the day you were removed from Ron DeSantis press conference. I think maybe our listeners might be a little, interested in some details about that. So
I actually never really share that detail. I always forget that one because there's so much stuff. That's the part I always forget to talk about. Yeah. So that was in the middle of the worst of COVID here in Brevard County. And, we had lost 10 staff members at that time. We had closed an entire elementary school because almost every single one of those students had tested positive for it. Not literally everyone, but I think it was like 70%. It was an alarming number. And I'll never forget this. So it was a Wednesday. I woke up that morning and I'm in my yoga pants. I'm thinking I have a couple hours at home by myself. I look like garbage. And I get a call that Ron DeSantis was coming to the Department of Health, which happened to just be across the street from the school board. And it's about 25 minutes from my home. And don't get me wrong, I did not believe that Ron DeSantis was coming here to say that he was going to save the day with COVID. But at a minimum, I thought he was going to have a PR campaign where he was offering to send more resources here for testing, which would be helpful too.
Because you were a hotspot. You were a hotspot. Yeah.
Yeah. And even though we have so many students and staff, like we're still considered a mid-sized county. So our Department of Health isn't overly staffed.
Got it. Okay.
And so I went to this press conference thinking it would be outside. I showed up exactly how I looked. I didn't go there for people to know who I was or.
You guys can't see her, but I have to say, and I don't mean to diminish you at all by commenting on your appearance, but you are very beautifully made up today.
So, well, thank you. I did not look like this on that day. and I don't mean to be so silly about it, but it's just.
No, I understand. You were in a rush.
I wasn't there to cause a spectacle, right. I promise.
Right.
But when I got there, it wasn't outside. It was inside, and no one was there except for press. And his communication staff had come downstairs and asked if everyone had registered. And I was very honest. I just said, no, I haven't. I'm sorry. I thought this was going to be outside, but I'm here and I'm a school board member across the street. And they said they had to ask for permission, and they did. And they said all of this in front of the media. And then they came back and they said, yeah, you're allowed to come, Miss Jenkins, come follow us. And so we had to go upstairs to this room. I sat in the back by myself because there was nobody else there except for media. And about 5-10 minutes later, they came in to tell me that I was no longer welcome, that it was not open to the public.
Somebody Googled you.
Well, Randy Fine was there. That's
okay. All right. Well, we'll get.
Yeah. And then, DeSantis was flanked by local elected officials during the press conference. So
you have a very long running, there's a lot of animosity between you and Randy Fine. And I'm going to let you talk about that if you want. Whatever you want to talk about, that's fine. I'm not going to push you on it though.
Yeah. I mean, I won't give him too much airtime because he enjoys that, but it is important to my experience and my story because that protest that showed up at my house later that evening was because of Randy Fine. The protesters blatantly told me that he had sent them there. But yeah, I mean, other than that, other than the protest, they vandalized my home. They destroyed my plants and my property. They burned "FU" in my grass in giant 3-foot letters where kids walk to school every morning. The next day, I received a visit from police officers and a DCF investigator. They had filed a claim that I was abusing my daughter.
Oh my gosh.
They said that I was burning her with cigarettes and that I was selling drugs out of my home. I had to take them to a play date to look underneath her clothes, and she was just 5 years old at the time, because they had to take it seriously, like it was a serious threat. I had people who would just intentionally drive back and forth in front of my house with their "Don't Tread on Me" flags, just because they could, because it's not illegal. People who would
park. I'm sorry.
No, which is weird to say. I don't think
I didn't mean to interrupt you. You're going on with this litany of very frightening. I mean, it's scary to hear it.
Yeah. I only got scared one time. And weirdly enough, it was none of the times that they were near my house. They brandished weapons behind my home, but I wasn't there for that. So that wasn't like a real fear for me. But at school board meetings, I eventually got very uncomfortable and I would admit fearful. I was fearful that maybe the officers weren't going to protect me if something was going to happen because of the politics that were at play, and not the individuals themselves, just the pressures from the top. Also because it was so much chaos and mayhem. Like, I don't even know how those officers would have controlled something if something was to happen there. I was instructed to which bathrooms to use to avoid certain members of the public. I was instructed to duck because our dais is bulletproof if there ever should be someone shooting at me. I was walked to and from my car before and after board meetings. I would have to call to say I'm here for them to walk me in. And not because I asked for it. It's just like they felt that they had to. That was scary for me. There was one workshop where there really wasn't many people in attendance, and someone came in kind of like holding like a winter coat, and it's Florida.
Right.
It just freaked me out, and I had never had that feeling before. And I left the room, and I had to leave for a couple of hours because I had this like impending fear that somebody was there to harm me. That was the only time that I felt very.
It's not unheard of that school board members have been attacked with weapons in Florida anyway. So I think that's not an irrational fear given everything that you were. I mean, you probably maybe not were frightened all the time, but I bet you were pretty PO'd.
Oh, yeah. I was sad. I was anxious. I was angry. And honestly, in hindsight, I should have been fearful.
Right.
I didn't have time to be fearful. I was so desensitized by the horrific, constant harassment, death threats that I was receiving. Like, unfortunately, I'm very desensitized to things that should be concerning to regular people.
And all this leading up to, while you're trying to protect the lives of children and faculty during a global pandemic, and then all the other things that are coming down from Tallahassee. Meanwhile, you're not on the school board anymore. And I think that's because they read did they draw you out, or did they just redraw and you ended up out of the district? I don't know.
So I have always been really transparent. I intended just to run one term anyway.
Oh, I see.
But they did. They redrew the district so that I would be put into a different district that was a higher Republican registration. They spent all that time, money, and energy, even though I was very clear I wasn't running.
You were only going to run for one term anyway.
Yeah.
How did that lead you into Educated We Stand?
Yeah. So, when I was going through some of the darkest times, I realized how important it was to have someone, even if you are a super minority representative, someone to stand up and speak for the voices in the community, to ensure that those school board members reflect the values of that community. And I also went through an experience feeling very alone, not from my community's perspective, but as an elected official who was going through the things I was going through, as a school board member who was going through the things I was going through. And I realized there's no white horse coming to save me. And if there's no white horse coming to save me, there's no white horse coming to save my community, the people I care for and advocate for, my role. And not to be so dramatic, but public education, because I knew that this was going to bleed out across the state. I knew it was going to bleed into other states. And I felt like I was shouting into a corner, and nobody was prepared or listening.
Screaming
and as I watched
void.
it spread, I just felt like this obligation to continue to use my platform and my voice to do something about it. I founded Educated We Stand to be able to support and elect and protect school board members, not only in the state of Florida, but in other battleground states that are seeing the effects of this right-wing extremism bleeding into their school systems. And it's only been just a short time. It's been about 6 months, but we have been incredibly successful, and the outpouring of support has been overwhelming and really, really positive. And I'm just really proud of the people we were able to support in this past cycle. And I really look forward to what we've got going on going forward.
We will be right back with Jennifer Jenkins. It's time, divas, for the news in haikus. This week's haiku, submitted by our special guest, Jennifer Jenkins. Shadows halt progress, yet educated we stand. Our light is wisdom. The news in haikus. Don't forget, we'd love to hear your haiku. You can slide them into my DMs, or you can send them to podcasts, that's podcasts with an S, at e.newsserviceflorida.com. Wherever you're listening, please don't forget to subscribe and give us a rating if you like what we're doing. And we're back with Jennifer Jenkins, the founder and chair of Educated We Stand. So you're recruiting school board candidates, or you're supporting school board candidates. Tell us a little bit about how that works and what your success rate was in November.
So we launched just shy of 3 months before the Florida primary in August.
Mm-hmm.
And it was about just shorter than 6 months before November. And so we supported 25 candidates. The majority of them were in Florida. Some of them were in Michigan, and 80% of our candidates were successful against or opponents who were endorsed by Moms for Liberty and or Ron DeSantis if they were in Florida. Huh. So it's a tremendous success rate. Yeah. And the majority of those candidates weren't in safe spaces. I made it a priority stance to say, I'm not doing this just to have fake positive numbers and fluff. I want to make a difference and a change.
Right. I mean, that's meaningful if you're making those percentages, those kinds of wins where there's truly a challenge, right? You're swimming upstream in many of those instances.
Yeah. And one of the most notable candidates that I'm so excited about, I texted her immediately when the results came in, was Liz Barker in Sarasota County. And what's unique about that candidate is she's a first-time candidate. Sarasota County is unique because it votes for their school board members countywide, which actually makes it more difficult.
Oh, right.
It's a lot more expensive to run a race as a school board member there. People
Sure.
often think of it as a down ballot ticket, but you have just as many voters as a state house rep and county commissioner.
Probably more than a state house rep in some instances.
In her instance, that could very much be possible.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's also a founding county of Moms for Liberty, and Bridget Ziegler is still sitting on that board.
And Bridget Ziegler's got her own issues. Yeah.
She does. She's still weirdly supported by her party though. But yeah, Liz
she's
Barker,
got ride or die,
Liz Barker was able to take it over the finish line, though.
I shouldn't have used that
and she
term,
ousted the chair.
Anyway, I'm sorry. Oh, she did. So she defeated an incumbent who was the chair of the school board.
Yeah.
Wow, that's a big deal.
It's a huge deal. I mean, it's a very red county, and as nonpartisan as these seats are.
Come on, they're not you're saying nonpartisan. You're not even winking. They're really not nonpartisan. They're technically nonpartisan, but are they really?
So I believe that they are, and they should be. But what I mean by, as much as we say that they are, I am not naive to the fact that the way politics plays here, right? The Republican Party of Sarasota, and probably the state, let every Republican in that county know that Liz Barker is a Democrat.
Right.
So that's what I mean by that. But it is nonpartisan, because the reality is, when you're on that dais, aside from this culture war nonsense that was stirred up, really none of those decisions have anything to do with politics, and they quite frankly shouldn't. But for me, the biggest thing, we did have that amendment here in Florida where they were trying to make races partisan. The reason I was so against that, never mind, keep politics out of schools, was you will then be eliminating the voice of a third of our voters who are registered.
That's true. That's right, because they would be able to vote in I guess they couldn't even vote in the general election.
They would only be allowed to vote in the general.
Right, they would.
Historically, especially in this really divisive time, when there are closed primaries, you're going to probably get the most extreme of each party as the nominee. And then when you have this potentially independent, moderate voter, who are they left to choose from? Their voice isn't necessarily being reflected.
That was interesting that failed. I was a little surprised by that, to be honest. The legislature put that on there. I think the legislature put 4 proposed constitutional amendments on the ballot, and only one of those, 3 of them went down, and that was one of the ones that went down. So people care a lot about their school boards. It is something that's very near, and even if you don't have children in school, it's very important to local voters, I think. Don't you?
Yeah, and that's the thing, is school boards, what's ironic about this whole parental rights movement and acting as if the Department of Education is taking over schools and get the federal government out. What's ironic is school boards is one of the most community-based involved governments we have. You elect these people to represent you in your local community, and those people actually have the most control over what that school district looks like, what the priorities are, what's budgeted, the
government closest
very, very
to the people,
closest
to the people, and people don't understand how important it is. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, you're fine.
What surprised you the most as a member of the Brevard County School Board, other than the amount of vitriol that you were subjected to?
The resilience of our staff members. It's not new. I mean, it's historically been a profession that has been demeaned and devalued and demoralized and diminished, and now more than ever before. But it was really remarkable to step outside of the school buildings that I have been in and just kind of be across the board in different communities and demographics, to see just how resilient people are and dedicated to the profession that they chose, and how they were able to kind of put blinders on the majority of people for what was going on outside.
A lot of teachers that I know over the years, it's like nurses. They really are not political activists. They just are not that interested. Not all teachers, but many teachers. They care about kids. They care about doing their job, and they're just not all that politically active. I know they have a union. The union's power has really diminished over the years, but they're not all members of the union anyway. And so I just have found it is another thing that seems kind of out of kilter to me in education, is how politicized that arena has become. And yet the people who really are the worker bees are really not that political.
Yeah.
Am I wrong, or is that?
No, you're not wrong. And anyone who works in education, especially in Florida, I don't think they'll disagree with this statement. And I don't mean every person, but they can reflect on their peers. Many people in this profession are scared to step out of line, regardless of the fact that we have a tremendous teacher shortage. And if they threaten to fire you, they probably won't, because they can't afford to. But they're always fearful of stepping out of line. They've always been treated in a way that they're less than, or that they don't have authority over their classroom and the decisions that they're making. And so, yeah, it's so strange to have convinced the public at large that these are the people who have planned this political indoctrination of your children. It's just not even their personality.
What do you think is the biggest challenge facing the state's public education system now? One of the other changes that we've seen, you're grinning, but one of the changes that was passed during your tenure is we now have the universal vouchers. So pretty much you can send your kids to school wherever you want, if you can figure out how to do it, which I think is not that difficult. But what do you think is the biggest challenge for Florida's teachers right now?
I do think that the political discourse has caused the biggest challenge, and it's the intentional distrust that's being stirred. When you choose a profession for moral reasons, and I say that because when I started as an educator with a master's degree 10 years ago, I was only making $38,000 a year. So I didn't choose the job for money, right?
Mm-hmm.
And especially like our seasoned professionals, they chose this because they felt like it was their calling. And it becomes kind of your identity, right? I love kids. I want to help kids. They buy clothes and food for these kids.
They buy school supplies a lot of times because they aren't.
They feel responsible for the future and success of these children. And when you have a community and a government that demonizes the very core of who you believe you are, I don't know how you function and move forward. And I do that, to me, honestly, just is the personal thing that I think is really, really challenging. I mean, the other side of it, the more operational side that's challenging, is the expansion of voucher programs and the poorly planned expansion of voucher programs. I'm scared for the residents of Florida to find out the negative ramifications 5-10 years from now, because I do think it'll take a really long time for them to understand it and to see it in play. A lot of charter schools and private schools don't have to follow the same regulations as public schools. And for some reason, people right now think that's a good thing, but historically, no, it is not. We're going to see segregation of communities. We're going to see students with disabilities who aren't getting the services that they need. We're going to see local community schools close, especially in our rural areas of the state who don't have options to charters and private schools. You're going to witness your taxpayer funds being flushed down the toilet when certain schools have to get closed because of their performance. And honestly, it's reflected in, the scores that Florida has been presenting over the past few years. Since Ron DeSantis has taken office, we have dropped in ranking for teacher pay nationally. I think we're last now. I think we've finally claimed 50th spot. And we've also dropped in ranking for SAT scores and graduation rates. And so, if his method was working, if his belief of the success of public education systems was working, then those numbers would be going in a very different direction.
And yet they are always bragging about, not they, but we hear much about how teachers got a big pay boost and, they've doing things for teachers. So that seems kind of contradictory to the statistic you just rattled off there.
Yeah, when you are the bottom of the barrel and, you put a little bit of stuff in there, sure, you get to brag about how you put more stuff in there than the people before you.
Okay.
But when you're not doing it at a rate as everybody else, it still keeps you at the bottom of the barrel. And quite frankly, we've fallen since he's taken office. I only give Ron DeSantis one praise ever. was raising the starting teacher salary. That was,
Right.
a positive. I can't say it wasn't, but there are so many negatives that came from that because they couldn't care less of the effects, which was now we had brand new teachers making the exact same salary as someone who's been working 13, 14 years in a school district. And they did absolutely nothing to help school districts deal with that wage compression, which further only made the teacher vacancies worse because now you have teachers who are towards the time in their career where they should start feeling like experts and be feeling valued.
Right.
Now working beside people who just graduated college making the exact
So
same
what do
salary.
they do? Do they quit or find something else to do, or do they just go to work resentful every day?
All of the above. In Brevard County, often they quit and they go leave. We are on the Space Coast. We have so many industries here that would take them in a heartbeat. The aerospace industry has been like sucking our teachers out left and right.
That's interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah, and they start in a brand new field and profession at like $80,000 a year and
Right.
great benefits. And they're able to do it because the mobility here is just so easy.
Wow, that's really interesting. Let's get back to Educated We Stand. I see you've got a 3-word. I'm counting the syllables because I'm doing this haiku thing. So anyway, very similar number of similars. But are you doing like Moms for Liberty has at this point now they have different chapters, local chapters. Are you trying to do that? Are you doing a statewide or a national? How are you doing your outreach?
So right now, our focus is just building a coalition support through candidates and organizations and parent resistant and community resistant groups that are already in the ground in those communities. At this point, no, I have no intention of, grifting chapters across America. My goal really is just to support these candidates to get over the finish line because the things that people are already fighting for on the ground, those parents and community members, none of those things can be accomplished if they don't have people in the seats to make those decisions.
How are you vetting the candidates? How do you vet them? Do you have like a questionnaire or something?
So we absolutely have a questionnaire, but to be frank, I have been so invested in Florida for so many years. I knew a majority of the candidates that we personally, but we also have been working with organizations that are focused on school boards and or education policy and initiatives who also have been working with candidates. We take a deep dive and make sure that the people that we align with or align with our initiatives also respect and value those candidates as people to be trusted.
And do you have any legislative priorities or are you focusing more on elections?
Right now, we are focused on elections. If there is an opportunity like Amendment 1 that comes up, absolutely, we're going to be, pushing and advocating for the right direction on those, as well as any referendums that are happening in certain areas that support public education. But right now, we're supporting elections, and that's primarily our focus. Again, I think the priority is right now to make sure that we have people in the places and spaces where they need to be to protect public ed.
So you're focusing on 2026 right now?
Actually, we're focusing on 25.
Oh my goodness.
We're hoping to be playing in Wisconsin in April and Pennsylvania in November of this cycle. There are off-year school board elections in those states. There's also a ton of elections going on in Wisconsin at the same time too. So it's important to make sure that there are candidates out there who are supporting the other ones who are running up the ticket. But yeah, and then we're also going to be preparing for 26 to ensure that we have candidates in the state of Florida, as well as in the other states that we previously played in.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate you joining us today. Is there anything that we didn't go over that you'd like to add? I
just appreciate the opportunity to talk with you and to talk about it. I think it's important that there's a voice out there, supporting the 85% of parents who choose their public schools and want them to be successful.
I always like to have one little fun question, so I might have a few depending on what your responses are. But you're a former educator now. You're not teaching, you're a speech language pathologist. Is that what I think you said?
Yep.
Okay. So I'm just wondering if you're reading anything. Do you have anything on your bedside table that you're reading right now?
I've made it my mission. I out myself every time I get asked this question. I am not historically a reader myself, but I have made it a mission to start picking up some banned books. And so I have been reading through some of those, but I actually just started yesterday, Education Wars by Jennifer Berkshire. We've met just, over the battle over the past year and a half. And I just kept telling myself, I need to buy her book and read it.
Okay.
And so I finally got it.
Okay. I haven't heard of that. And so that's Education Wars by
Jennifer Berkshire.
Okay. Just gave her a little plug.
Yeah.
And
sorry, I didn't mean to do that, but
no, that's good. No, I'm glad. I'm glad that we did that. Are you a watcher? Do you watch, like, I'm a Netflix person. Are you watching anything on Netflix if you don't read?
Yeah, I'm definitely a TV junkie. And I got to be honest with you, though, like for me to turn my brain off, I watch The Real Housewives.
Oh, yes.
I'm honest.
There we go.
I gotta watch other people fight.
You watch that. That's funny because I watch crime. I watch British crime drama. So I like to get cheeky with some British crime drama. I just need to turn off too. Well, Jennifer Jenkins, the founder of Educated We Stand, former Brevard County School Board member, thank you so much for joining us. I can't wait to have you back on Deeper Dive.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Deeper Dive with Dara, a podcast by the News Service of Florida, hosted by News Service senior writer Dara Cam and produced by me, Mike Exline. Music for the podcast was recorded by Periodic Labs, LLC.